Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines. Ukraine has mobilized its military reserve and urges its citizens to leave Russian territory as Moscow defies an avalanche of international sanctions, sharpening its demands and raising fears of an all-out war. One person is found dead in a submerged car and 10 others are reportedly missing after heavy rains caused flash flooding in eastern Australia and set off a string of emergency warnings up and down the Pacific coast. And the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, or OWA, said that employers who will not accept overseas Filipino workers in Hong Kong who have been infected with COVID and have since recovered will face sanctions. And later, Dubai opened its Museum of the Future, a structure it touts as the world's most beautiful building. And we are now seeing Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and that's how President Biden put it when he addressed the nation. Let's listen in.
This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, as he indicated and asked permission to be able to do from his Duma. So let's begin to, I'm going to begin to impose sanctions in response far beyond the steps we and our allies and partners implemented in 2014. We're implementing full blocking sanctions on two large Russian financial institutions, VEB and their military bank. We're implementing comprehensive sanctions on Russia's sovereign debt. That means we've cut off Russia's government from Western financing. It can no longer raise money from the West and cannot trade in its new debt on our markets or European markets either. Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors? This is a flagrant violation of international law and demands a firm response from the international community. Russia's moved troops closer to Ukraine's border with Russia. Russia's naval vessels are maneuvering in the Black Sea to Ukraine's south, including amphibious assault ships, missile cruisers, and submarines. Russia's moved supplies of blood and medical equipment into position on their border. You don't need blood unless you plan on starting a war.
Now, Mr. Biden called this the first set of sanctions with more to come. And as earlier mentioned, Ukraine has already mobilized its military reserve and has urged its citizens to leave Russian territory as Moscow defies an avalanche of international sanctions, sharpening its demands and raising fears of an all-out war. Meanwhile, the UK and other European countries already imposed their own sanctions. Germany on Tuesday put on ice on the controversial Nord Stream 2 pipeline in response to Moscow's recognition of two breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine, finally stopping the 10 billion euro project that has long irked allies. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said he had asked for the approval process to be halted despite a severe energy crisis that has sent gas prices soaring in Europe. Berlin had for over the years doggedly pursued the pipeline, which was set to double natural gas import capacity from Russia, despite opposition from the U.S. and Eastern Europe, which fear it would leave the continent too dependent upon Russian energy. Running from Russia's Baltic coast to northeastern Germany, the 1,200-kilometer underwater Nord Stream 2 follows the same route as Nord Stream 1, which was completed over a decade ago. Like its twin, Nord Stream 2 would be able to pipe 55 billion cubic meters of gas per year from Russia to Europe, increasing the continent's access to relatively cheap natural gas at a time of falling domestic production. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said he had canceled a planned meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov later this week. Let's listen in.
Now that we see the invasion is beginning, and Russia has made clear its wholesale rejection of diplomacy, it does not make sense to go forward with that meeting at this time. I consulted with our allies and partners, all agreed. And today I sent Foreign Minister Lavrov a letter informing him of this.
Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin said the country's interests were non-negotiable. In a video address to mark the Defender of the Fatherland Day, a public holiday in the country, President Putin congratulated the Russian military and he praised the battle readiness of the army after he signaled plans to send troops to Ukraine. Let's listen in.
Наша страна всегда открыта для прямого и честного диалога, для поиска дипломатических развязок самых сложных проблем. Интересы России и безопасность наших граждан для нас безусловны.
Russian President Vladimir Putin also said that the best solution to the Ukraine crisis would be for Kiev to drop its NATO membership ambitions and stay neutral. The president said he wanted concrete agreements from NATO that it would not expand eastwards. He also said Moscow seeks legal guarantees, adding that the West had not fulfilled their spoken obligations and ignored Russian concerns. Is close to Russian borders, saying this was more than serious to Moscow.
В документах НАТО наша страна официально, прямо объявлена главной угрозой евроатлантической безопасности. И в качестве передового плацдарма для такого удара будет служить Украина. Хочу четко, прямо сказать, в сложившейся ситуации, когда наши предложения о равноправном диалоге по принципиальным вопросам фактически остались без ответа со стороны США и НАТО, когда уровень угроз для нашей страны значительно возрастает, Россия имеет полное право принимать ответные меры обеспечения собственной безопасности. Самым лучшим решением этого вопроса было бы, чтобы наши коллеги в западных странах не теряли, что называется, лица, чтобы сегодняшние киевские власти сами отказались от вступления в НАТО. По сути, реализовали бы идею нейтралитета.
Here in the country, Cabinet Secretary Carlo Nogralli said the government is hoping for a peaceful resolution of the Ukraine crisis. However, he said President Duterte has prepared for, quote, any eventualities. Let's listen in.
Unang-una sa lahat, syempre we hope that all parties will explore all avenues. Sana po ay makapaghanap po tayo lahat, no, dito sa buong mundo, makapaghanap po ng mabuting avenues para matagumpay nating marating ang kapayapaan. The President and your government is preparing for any and all eventualities and any and all contingencies are being prepared. Kasama at kabilang sa kinakausap ni Pangulo yung mga kagawaran na directly involved at that will be directly involved for any and all eventualities and contingencies. No? Kabilang na dyan ang Department of Transportation, kabilang na rin po dyan yung Department of Energy. And of course, our Security, Justice, and Peace Cluster.
Meanwhile, Saudi oil expert Youssef Al-Shamari said he expects oil prices to keep increasing, reaching a peak of $110 per barrel this summer as major crude producer Russia prepares to send troops into two breakaway regions of Ukraine, sparking Western nations to ready economic sanctions against Moscow. Again, let's listen in.
So I would expect oil prices to reach the peak or the highest level at some point in the summer. After that, perhaps we could see some slightly reducing in prices because as demand continues to decline towards the end of the year, going to go towards winter. But from my own judgment, I would expect to see prices perhaps hitting $110 as demand continues to rise under these conditions. The economy, I guess we're going to see more inflation. And that certainly will have a knock-on effects on the Federal Reserve policies and central bankers. So we would expect a rise in interest rates at some point in 2022. And perhaps that could somehow make a strengthening dollar, and in a way that could, let's say, reduce the speed at which Brent prices are rising. In OPEC Plus, we've heard from ministers that they are not planning to pump any more oil above the already agreed quota. So, and we're already seeing some underperformance from many OPEC countries. So that's in fact what makes me worried about the market tightness that we're likely to see in the first half of 2022. Also, something I'm also worried about is stagflation, where we see an increase in the prices without really an increase in the economy. So if we can avoid these two scenarios, I think that we can avoid any economic damage. On the other hand, high oil prices should bring some good returns for OPEC countries, because we all know that OPEC countries continue to be predominantly oil-based economies. So an increase in oil prices will lead to an increase in GDP, also more spending power, and that will also lead to more investments in economic diversification of projects, especially within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for an immediate ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, condemning Moscow's recognition of the independence of two breakaway Ukrainian regions. Again, let's listen in.
Our world is facing the biggest global peace and security crisis in recent years, certainly in my tenure as Secretary General. We face a moment that I sincerely hope would not come. I'm deeply troubled by the latest developments regarding Ukraine, including reports of increased ceasefire violations across the contact line and the real risk of further escalation on the ground. Let me be clear. The decision of the Russian Federation to recognize the so-called independence of certain areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions is a violation of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. It is also a death blow to the Minsk agreements endorsed by the Security Council. I'm also concerned about the perversion of the concept of peacekeeping. When troops of one country enter the territory of another country without its consent, they are not impartial peacekeepers. They are not peacekeepers at all. At this critical moment, I call for an immediate ceasefire and re-establishment of the rule of law.
Meanwhile, here are satellite images showing new deployments of Russian troops and military equipment near the Ukrainian border, according to a U.S. company. The pictures show multiple new field deployments of armored equipment and troops departing from existing military sites into forests and fields approximately 9 to 19 miles from Russia's border with Ukraine, according to U.S. satellite imagery company Maxar in an email. The new photos, taken Sunday, appear to show vehicle tracks cutting through snow-covered fields that are surrounded by woodland and bordered by roads, with several buildings also visible. Analysis of Sunday's photos, plus others taken February 13, indicate troop and equipment movement near 3 localities in southwestern Russia, according to the Colorado-based satellite company. Russia has placed more than 150,000 troops near Ukraine's borders in recent weeks, the United States and Western allies have estimated, and Moscow denies it has plans to attack its western neighbor, but it is seeking a guarantee that Ukraine will never join NATO and that the Western alliance remove forces from Eastern Europe, demand the West has refused. OWA says employers who will not accept overseas Filipino workers in Hong Kong who have been infected with COVID and have since recovered will face sanctions. And Cyclone Amnati overnight lashed the island nation of Madagascar, still reeling from the impact of another cyclone earlier this month. And A helicopter falling into the Atlantic Ocean, not far from people swimming or sunbathing on the crowded beach. That and more when Eagle News International comes back.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Mailalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back. The Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, or OWA, said that employers who will not accept overseas Filipino workers in Hong Kong and who have been infected with COVID and have since recovered will face sanctions. Let's listen in.
Posibleng kaharapin ay yun nga, yung labor case dahil nga kung tagang tuluyan nilang ite-terminate yung ating OFW, susunod ay yung dito sa POEA. Nagdeklara na rin si Sec Bello na i-blacklist ang mga employers na gano'n na naging treatment sa ating mga manggagawa. So, dalawa yan. So, from Hong Kong side and the Philippine side, sa Hong Kong side, labor case sa Hong Kong Labor Authorities, legal termination. And then dito naman sa POEA, yung blacklisting ng mga employers na nagsasagawa ng illegal termination. Pinag-utos din ni Secretary Bello yung laganap na assistance. Unang-una, as we speak, merong food assistance, merong hygiene, basic hygiene assistance, hygiene kits na binibigay sa mga OFWs natin in isolation. Merong power bank kasi nga kailangan nila ng power bank pa sa kanilang cellphones. And then, of course, paglabas nila, pag naka-recover na sila, nakaabang yung $200 financial assistance natin sa kanila. Mga 2 taon na, Yusek Rocky natin pinapalaganap ito. Kung naalala nyo, pinutos ng OWA board led by Sec Bello, yung $200 assistance sa mga OFWs na natapuan ng COVID. 20,000 na po ang nakinabang dito ng OFWs sa $200 benefit na ito. Pag naka-recover yung mga Hong Kong OFWs natin from isolation, gagawaran po natin sila ng $200 at kung sila po yung nag-decide na mag-for good, at karamihan po sa kanila ay finish contract na rin yung mga nasa isolation kasi nga nagpa-PCR test sila for IATF rules pa uwi, kaya lang nag-positive. Bibigyan natin sila ng livelihood at kung may college level dependent sila, scholarship po para sa kanilang college level dependent.
Meanwhile, Mr. Kakdak added that they are studying the possibility of sending a medical team to Madagascar now, where the island nation is bracing for its 4th tropical cyclone in a month and is prompting UN aid appeals for $26 million in funding to help the most vulnerable. Heavy rains already along the path of the storm, up to 250 millimeters on the flat and 450 to 500 millimeters at higher altitudes. Although it's the typhoon season in the Indian Ocean, it is rare to see 4 storms hitting the same country in the space of 4 weeks. And that is according to Claire Nalles from the World Meteorological Organization. Let's listen in.
The expected intensity at landfall is tropical cyclone category 2 equivalent. We had been concerned yesterday that it might actually strengthen to a strong category 3 or even 4. That fortunately didn't happen. But even so, the winds are going to be very high. There'll be high winds, destructive gusts of between 150 to 200 kilometers an hour. And it's a big storm, so these winds are going to cover a large radius.
Madagascar is set to be hit this evening local time by the 4th extreme weather event in as many weeks, with tropical cyclone Emnati likely to add to the damage already caused earlier by tropical cyclone Batsirai, tropical storm Dumako, and tropical storm Anna. An estimated 270,000 people were affected by Batsirai, which struck central Madagascar on the 5th of February after Anna hit in late January. Some 21,000 people remain displaced, and 20,500 homes were destroyed, flooded, or damaged from that event. We're in a race against time to protect those who dealt with the fury of the first 3 extreme weather events from the impact of Emnati.
Now, the storm Emnati, which just passed north of Indian Ocean islands of Mauritius and Reunion, had weakened slightly by the time it reached the eastern coast of Madagascar, but was still packing winds of around 100 kilometers per hour and gusts of 140 kilometers per hour, according to Meteo France. The cyclone is forecast to exit Madagascar Wednesday night, but authorities are still warning of torrential rains. National weather forecaster Meteo Madagascar warned of strong gusts, heavy rain, and widespread flooding around the southern and southeastern districts. Meanwhile, firefighters set backfires in the Iberra National Park in the Argentine province of Corrientes, a technique used to control a wildfire by setting fires along the fire line's inner edge. Almost 800,000 hectares have been consumed by flames that have destroyed more than 9% of the province. Firefighters, police, and volunteers have been trying for weeks to put out the fires, which have taken hold amid drought linked to La Nina, the La Nina climate phenomenon, as temperatures have risen around the planet. Meanwhile, one person was found dead in a submerged car, and 10 others were reportedly missing on Wednesday after heavy rains caused flash flooding in eastern Australia and set off a string of emergency warnings up and down the Pacific coast. The body of the drowned 60-year-old was found early Wednesday in the state of Queensland, according to Premier Anastasia Palachuk told Parliament, describing the incident as a tragedy. Almost half a meter or 1.5 feet of rain has fallen on some parts of her state in the last 24 hours, causing multiple road closures and transport chaos. Emergency services received more than 100 calls for help, and swift water rescue crews have been dispatched to assist dozens of stranded residents. Local media quoted Sunshine Coast Police District Superintendent Craig Hawkins as saying that 10 people were still missing. 15 Queensland dams are at capacity, and more rain is expected in the coming days. Meanwhile, 2 people were hospitalized after the helicopter they were flying in crashed into the ocean off a beach in the U.S. state of Florida. Take a look. Now, Miami Beach Police said on Twitter they received a call about the crash at 1:10 p.m. local time. As you can see here, a video posted alongside the tweet shows a helicopter falling into the Atlantic Ocean not far from where people were swimming or sunbathing on the crowded beach. Mary Schiavo, the former Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Transportation, said on CNN that the video showed the helicopter appearing to lose engine power. There were 2 important things at work here, she said. 1, the pilot was trained, and 2, was able to maintain some control of the aircraft, because it appears that once you lose your engines, you have nowhere to go, but hopefully a controlled trajectory down. She also said that watching the video, it appeared the pilot was able to steer away from beachgoers even as the helicopter fell. The FAA told CNN in a statement that the helicopter crashed under unknown circumstances. The Aviation Authority said it would investigate the accident along with the National Transportation Safety Board. Meanwhile, President Nicolas Maduro said 2 Venezuelan military personnel were killed and 2 others injured when a Russian-made helicopter crashed in the South American nation. Now, it was unclear why the chopper went down, and Maduro has ordered an investigation. The aircraft burst into flames when it crashed, and the injured pilot and co-pilot were pulled to safety by local residents and laborers. The Venezuelan army said in a statement that the crash occurred during a supply mission to border protection bases. In other news, a man who held several people hostage at an Apple store in Amsterdam demanded 200 million euros in cryptocurrency before he was taken to hospital seriously injured, according to police today. The man, identified as a 27-year-old from Amsterdam, entered the Apple store carrying a firearm in the busy Lid Zeppelin neighborhood late Tuesday afternoon, and it sparked a tense 5-hour-long ordeal. The camouflage-wearing assailant held 1 man hostage, a 44-year-old British national, according to reports, while 4 others hid in a closed closet. It was initially feared the suspect was holding several people hostage, but he was reportedly not aware that several more people were in hiding in the building. The dramatic ordeal finally ended around 10:30 local time when the hostage asked for water. He left the building and then ran, prompting the suspect to chase after him. The suspect was then hit hard by a police car before a robot checked him for explosives as he lay on the road, painted by laser sights from police snipers. All Apple stores across the Netherlands were closed on Wednesday, and the site of Tuesday's hostage-taking will remain closed until Thursday. In other news, India has sent 50 trucks carrying 2,500 tons of wheat for crisis-hit Afghanistan after Pakistan gave exceptional permission for the shipment to pass through, according to officials today. Western countries sharply reduced aid after the Taliban takeover last year, leaving Afghanistan facing a devastating humanitarian crisis with a majority of the 28 million population in need of help, according to the United Nations. In response to an appeal from the UN, India decided to gift 5,000 tons of wheat, and the first convoy of lorries was flagged off by officials on Tuesday at a ceremony in Amritsar near the border with Pakistan. India's arch-rival, Pakistan, said that it agreed on an exceptional basis to allow the shipment to traverse through its territory. Islamabad had suspended trade with India back in 2019 after New Delhi rescinded the partial autonomy of Indian-administered Kashmir, which both countries claim in full. In other news, Sri Lanka's inflation hit a record high for the fourth consecutive month, according to official data, as an economic crisis driven by a crippling foreign exchange shortage worsens. The National Consumer Price Index, or NCPI, rose 16.8% in January from a year earlier, the fourth consecutive record rise and more than double October's figure of 8.3%. The record highs came as the South Asian island struggles to find dollars to finance essential imports, including food, fuel, and medicines. The Energy Ministry announced Monday it was struggling to buy fuel on credit and reported shortages at many pumping stations, leading to queues and forcing some to shut. The ministry said the main state-owned oil company, the Ceylon Petroleum Corp, was straddled with outstanding debt of $3.5 billion and was no longer able to raise new commercial loans. In a further blow to the government's plans to raise much-needed revenue, the Supreme Court shut down a new tax bill which targeted an additional 50 billion rupees or $250 million this year. The worsening economic crisis has already led to food rationing, with supermarkets restricting the quantity of rice, milk, powder, sugar, lentils, and tinned fish sold to consumers. Now, over the past decade, Baidoa has grown accustomed to large population influxes. More than 60% of its population, estimated at 700,000, are now displaced.
If the situation continue worsening, we are expecting to host hundred thousands of more people come to Baidoa.
Desperate, hungry, and thirsty, more and more people are now flocking to Baidoa from the countryside of southern Somalia, one of the regions hardest hit by the drought that is engulfing the Horn of Africa. Humanitarian organizations have been ringing alarm bells on the deteriorating situation in the Horn of Africa for weeks, with fears of a repeat of the 2011 famine in Somalia that cost the lives of 260,000 people. Insufficient rainfall since late 2020 has come as a fatal blow to populations already suffering from locust invasions between 2019 and 2021 and the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the UN's World Food Program, nearly 13 million people, mostly farmers and herders, are going hungry in the region. 5.7 million in Ethiopia, 2.8 million in Kenya, and 4.3 million in Somalia, a quarter of the country's population. In Somalia, the UN's humanitarian agency, OCHA, said this month that the number of people who have left their homes in search of water, food, and pasture has doubled to more than 554,000. And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Mobile Legends! Ang morning show na always nagbibigay ng ngiti at saya sa bawat kada all over the world. Tara na't ma-inspire at ma-amaze sa kwento ng mga bawat kada na nagwagi sa anumang hamon at pagsubok ng buhay. Itago ng mga remote control at tumambay lang dito sa paborito niyong barkada sa umaga, ang Kada Umaga! Dahil kayo ang bida dito.
Sa ating pong lipunan, hindi na mawawala ang mga samot-saring problema. Kaya tuloy lamang pong pag-aksyon, paghahanap ng solusyon. Lalo na ngayon, may maaasahan ka ng re-responde. Sabado, alas 6 hanggang alas 7 ng gabi. Ito ang Responde, mata ng mamamayan.
Nakikiusap po ako! Maawa ka po sa kanya! Hindi ako maawa! Bakit ba? Lahat na lang nasabihin namin ay kinukontra mo! Ako, si Kontraman!
Mga kasama, ito ng mga dokumento. Kailangan nating lagdaan yan. Gamit ang ating mga dugo. Kailangan mo talagang dugo? Dugo. Pwede atsuekin na lang. Ang ating pong game ngayon ay pagalingan sa Tinikling!
Bida sa pelikula, sa commercials, sa game shows, sa puso mo. Pero ngayon, kayo naman ang bibida dito. Soon on Net25.
Bago pa man ang pandemya ng COVID-19, mataas na ang pagkilala ng mga Pilipinong consumer sa responsibilidad ng mga kumpanya na tumutulong sa lipunan. But during the pandemic, we've seen more and more companies committing to such corporate social responsibility activities. What has inspired this generosity, and how can businesses get involved in building their communities? We'll find this out from our guests from JCI Manila as they share how COVID-19 is encouraging corporate social responsibility.
I believe every small act, lahat ng kabataan, may kakayahan upang tumulong sa ating mga komunidad.
Pwede natin tignan yung pandemya na maganda rin para sa mga millennial. Kasi ngayon nabigyan na tayo ng pagsubok na yun. And susuko ba tayo? Nasa sa atin na yun. And of course, ang advice natin is, wag na wag sumuko.
All this in this episode of Open for Business.
Ngayong linggo, itigil muna ang mga gawaing bahay at manood ng Tara Game agad-agad kasama ang mga mahal nating Tara Gamers na kasambahay. So pag nakuha mo yung 100,000, anong unang-una mong gagawin?
Papagamot ko po yung tatay ko. Mayroon po akong pinapaaral ng mga anak. 3 po sila.
Isa kaya sa kanila ay maswerteng mag-uuwi ng 100,000 pesos? Alas 7 ng gabi, dito lang sa Net25.
To Canada now, where a dozen people brave the cold and the wind for an outside exercise class to try to find their way surrounded by alpacas in the freezing Canadian winter. Take a look.
Just the challenge of moving your body in a good way, in unison with others, in the environment, really encourages you to connect to the space around you, to be in the moment of the cold, but also move past it. And I think the animals just keep everything kind of normal.
As you can see here, the freezing temperatures aren't stopping them from exercising. Now, the proceeds at this session at the farm will go to helping take care of these animals until their natural death. Cute. Dubai opened its Museum of the Future, a structure it touts as the world's most beautiful building. Take a look.
آخر لدولة الإمارات.
العبارات المقروءة لو كانت نحن قدام تحدي أن تكون العبارات مقروءة مش مجرد عبارات منثورة. فالعبارات المقروءة دائما فيها نوع من التحدي، كيف تشبك هذه العبارات في كتلة مثل هذه.
And as always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert, stay informed, because we live in interesting times. Good night.